Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our budget workshop today on the 13th of August, 2020. We have all council members present, so of course that means we have a quorum. So this meeting is called to order. We had no public comment, so we will move right into the workshop agenda. And we will start with an update and discussion related to property and casualty insurance. Charles Hagan, you're on, please.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning.
I'm Charles Hagan, your risk manager, and we're going to take a look at our property casualty fund account as it relates to auto damages and things of that nature. On the first slide, you will find that the police department is at the top, and they'll remain at the top as we go through the slides. And there is some expectation there that, am I still on?
There you are. Okay,
because my screen just changed completely. I'm sorry. So the police department is at the top of the list, and in relation to that, you know, they have a greatest portion of the fleet assigned to them, and they're also on the road 24/7. So they inherently are at greatest risk of having more accidents than anybody else. And so that explains their number a little bit, as high as it is compared to the other departments. And that's something that we want to take into consideration. The other thing on the fiscal year 17 slide is the cost incurred. And the cost incurred will inherently be affected by the severity of the accidents. And here we see that the water distribution has an incredible cost incurred, considerably more than the others. And that was a result of a very severe accident. And so, you know, the severity of the accident will have a pretty good impact on the budget as far as our accounts are concerned.
May I first ask why this information is so old? Because it's from 2016 to 2017. We're in the 2019, 2020. Was there not more recent information that could have been provided?
Yes, ma'am. We got 3 years of information for you. So as we go forward, we're going to cover the last 3 years, and then we'll look at where we're at currently.
Okay, thank you.
And so the bottom row on the bottom down there says total across all departments. That was 145 total auto claims for fiscal year 17 at a cost of $342,991.
Do we have comparisons of what, whether this is somewhat in the range of what most cities experience in terms of number of claims and dollars incurred?
I have not done a benchmark report across the other cities. Though the number of vehicles on the road versus the severity of the impact is really what's going to have a greater increase to our funds. And so if we move on to fiscal year 18, you'll see that everything has improved. And as we go forward, each year has gotten better for us. The total numbers of claims is down to 122 from 145. And we had a total cost incurred in fiscal year 18 of $69,000. So there can be a very huge variance from year to year, again, depending on the severity of claims and the number. Just to note, that was a reduction of a good number of reductions from the prior year. And then as we go on to fiscal year 19, we see yet again another drop. Though the cost is up, again, that reflects the severity of the accidents, but the claim numbers were down a little bit more. And then in fiscal year 20, which will be my last slide, you can see we're currently at 66 claims and cost incurred at $299,000.
Well, may I ask, because the $299,000 is a bigger number than if you add all of those costs incurred by the individual areas. They don't come up to $299.
Yes, ma'am. The $299 is all the departments, not just those 5.
So those 5 would be what percentage of that 299? Because we're only showing those 5, and yet those 5, if you add them up, are a small percent of the basically $300,000. So where's the other expense?
If you give me a minute, ma'am, I'll pull those numbers up for you.
I mean, what says 50% is the police, but that's 50% of these 5, right? Or 46.97% is 50% of the numbers that are there.
The 50% is going to be the overall claim number. So that's going to be 50% of the 66 claims.
Okay. But then the 50,000 is 17% cost incurred.
Yes, ma'am.
Again, if you add those percentages up, we're missing something here in terms of where the big hole is in terms of the cost across all departments.
Yes, ma'am. So these, there's actually 6 on this slide. Those 6 departments represent 20% of the total cost.
But where's the other 80?
It would be spread out between the other departments. We were asked to just give the top 5 to 6 highest rated departments. So I did not put an entire list of all the departments on it. I couldn't even fit that on slide, but.
Mayor, if I could
Yes.
speak a little bit here. So as we were, and again, Brian Kendrick, Director of Human Resources, as we were putting this together, the way that we separated the top claimants was by the number of claims. We could certainly get you the opposite information by the cost incurred if that would help, but we put it together by the number of claims. And it's a good point that you're making, because it's pretty obvious that this accounts for most of the claims in these top 6, but not most of the dollars. And so we could definitely provide you with the information of, my guess is it's probably mostly in one accident that or one claim that the rest of that money is incurred. Again, it must have been fairly severe.
Well, and because if you go back to the 2018, 2019, and you look at the total dollars in those 5 categories, it comes up to a large percent of the total dollars. It's just when you get to this year,
Sure.
All of a sudden, the
Absolutely.
20% of those it only represents 20% of those dollars. So there's a big miss somewhere.
Yeah, that's an understandable question. Again, as we separated it, of course, most times if you show most of the percentage of claims, then it's going to show most of the percentage of cost. But on this particular year, evidently there's one claim that's in one of the departments that's significantly higher. So we can certainly get that information. My apologies, we didn't catch that as we were putting this together, but we can certainly get you that information.
Okay, proceed. Well, we have one more slide.
More slide.
Okay. This is the grand total from 2016 to 2020 slide.
Yes, ma'am. And there's your grand total of the 3 years and the current year, and with the total cost incurred up to this point.
Because see, again, in this one, your cost incurred represents a large part of that 545,000, so that makes sense. So there's something about that one slide that doesn't seem right. Because when you add them all up, the cost incurred dollars of 545,943 is represented there. I'm not sure.
Mayor, I think you're right. As I'm doing the number in my head, that appears to be some sort of typo on slide 5. But like I said, we'll get you a resolution on that number.
This one seems to reflect it. So basically, yes. 2 questions I have, and then I'm sure council has some questions as well. One is, what is the training that we have in place to help reduce the number of claims, because if you look at it on 66 claims in 2019, 2020, total of 66 claims. What do we do to work with our staff, our employees, to try to reduce the number of claims? And then number two, what, with these claims and these dollar amounts, what impact has there been in terms of our insurance costs?
So the training that we have in place, ma'am, is we do a defensive driving course. All new hires go through the defensive driving course and then take another course on a 3rd-year anniversary. And at any point in time during that time period, if a supervisor has concerns over an employee's driving, they can send them back to the defensive driving course at any time.
So once someone has the first defensive driving and then a 3-year course on defensive driving, there's no more defensive driving education for our employees?
Not driven from my office, no. Now they can do tailgate training and things like that down at the department level, but I don't manage that. I don't oversee that. I let those supervisors take care of it.
Charles, can you speak to whether or not it's just the 3rd anniversary or it's every 3rd year?
Every 3rd year.
Okay, so it is repetitive.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. And then based off of this, over the same time period of these statistics, what has been the increase in insurance costs or the decrease in insurance costs?
Well, the cost to my funds are those costs that are listed there. We don't have an excess insurance to cover the day-to-day operation. So that is what we incur in-house.
So we don't have any increase in insurance costs to the city on an annual basis or on every 3-year basis or every 5-year basis?
Mayor,
Yes, please.
one things that we did this year was actually in the property casualty fund, we were able to actually reduce the burden on the general fund this year, and we hope to move that forward. We believe that we've got a plan related to how we assess the I guess the premiums per asset, and we're kind of reworking that as we move forward. So hopefully we'll have additional savings that we can that the general fund will realize as well. But this year we actually reduced the property casualty burden across departments.
Okay, thank you. I am going to ask if there's any questions from council members for Brian or for Mr. Hagan. Yes, Tommy?
Tommy Hebert, Single Member District 1, either Brian or Charles, either one. It hasn't been stated out loud, but this is a truly self-insured program. We have no stop-loss insurance above a certain point whatsoever. So we totally self-insure these claims. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was reading between the lines. So yeah, that would then, we would have no insurance cost in there.
But we could have increased costs, and so the issue is,
Right.
regardless whether it's self-insured or an outside firm, you still can have increased expenses relative to these and an impact on the general fund.
Absolutely. And I think that's what Brian was saying. They are working on something that will address or at least help address our overall costs of self-insurance in this particular account. Is that correct, Brian?
Yes, and I'm sure we'll be bringing presentations in the future to council as things change. But one of the things that's been a focus, and I know it was a focus from mayor, council, Daniel, me, as I came to human resources and risk management, to look at things from a business perspective, to make things make business sense. And so we're applying some of those things into how we look at our risk management side. And Charles has been great. He's been doing a lot of the backup work. And again, just this year, we were able to actually reduce the burden to the funds for both risk management funds, both 320 and 330. We were able to reduce the burden. So hopefully that will continue. The more business, business driving, I guess, innovations and looking at the way we do those processes. Hopefully we'll see more of that in the future. And any complete rehab of it, I'm sure we'll bring to council as that's going forward to let y'all know what we found and, get y'all's direction.
Good. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Do I have anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? All right, I just want to keep emphasizing we need to continue with training and constant reminders of safety so that we don't end up with a huge hit to the general fund down the way. So thank you, Charles. Thank you, Brian. And thank you for doing that work and letting us better understand what's going on in terms of claims and accidents.
Thank you, Mary.
With that, we will now move into item B, which is update and discussion related to health insurance. And we have Brian, you're back on again, and I think Julie Rickman is here as well today. Is that correct?
I believe so. I haven't seen that Julie's on the line, but I believe she is. And so what we'll do is we'll start by looking at some of the, just kind of reviewing some of the things we talked about last meeting as a primer. And then as we get into the options that y'all had requested, I'll take back over. So I think, Julie, if you're okay starting this, and then as we get to the options, I'll join in.
Absolutely. And good morning, Mayor and Council. This is Julie Rickman. I'm with Holmes Murphy. We are the benefit consultants for the city of San Angelo. And so we work with very closely with Human Resources and Brian's team to come up with the budget for our medical plans for the ongoing plan year. So really what we start off is the look back on how your plan has performed over the history of really the plan and the current contract types that we have now. So looking back to July, actually this goes back to May of 2016, and this goes through May of 2020, just because the way that we have claims lag data, and so you don't see the May at the end, but it's there. Our plan has been running really well over the last 4 or 5 years, and our trend, which means that how our plan is actually running compared to let me start it from the beginning. So the green line is your actual claim. So each of those little green peaks and valleys are how your claim is actually performing month over month. The purple line that you see, or black, depending on how your screen is showing it, is the actual slope of your trend and how your plan is actually performing. So over the last 4 years, your plan is running at a 2.5% trend, which is significantly higher than the market is. And this is medical specifically. And if you go to the next slide, when we look at our pharmacy, it's a little bit of a different story. You see that it's not as volatile when it comes to your actual trend. So you don't see each month hopping up and down a whole lot. But overall, the slope of that trend is at 15.9%. So we can see it significantly increasing. That really has to do with a lot of those specialty medications that are coming out, the ones that you see on TV that cure things, that really are very helpful and can very much improve the quality of life for individual people. They're expensive because of the nature of those medications. And so when we look at that slope of your pharmacy, it's not surprising that it's significantly higher than when we look at your medical. And we constantly monitor that and try and figure out the best things to do for not just your plan, but for the members that are on your plan, to ensure that we can keep the integrity of how this slope keeps going. Okay. Next one.
Excuse me.
Yes,
Question.
Julie, go ahead.
Billy DeWitt, single member District 6. On that first slide, Julie, you mentioned that the 2.5% increase is significantly lower than the market. Do you know what the market is?
Right now we're looking at 6.9%, but in this time period when we're looking at it, we've had medical trend as high as 10% and as low as 6.5% or 7%. So when we look at our trend, we're I would say 6.9 is pretty fair to say, 7% is pretty fair to say, and we're running at 2.5.
Okay, and you may be going to get to this, Julie, but kind of the significant increase that we see in the February, April timeframe, is that due to the COVID-19?
That actually, COVID helped us surprisingly. So when we look in February, December, and January and February, we had some claims that hit us in those months, which is why we had that big spike. Our utilization went up, but we had some large claim spend that happened during those months. If you look at March, April, and May, and you see that big dip down, that is due to COVID. So COVID actually, some people weren't going in and getting elective surgeries done. They weren't really, frankly, they weren't going to the doctor as much as they would have normally. That actually helped our trend line start to go back down again. But that significant increase was not COVID. COVID actually helped us level that line back out again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I would be concerned that if they weren't doing it, if 2 months down the road, we're going to see a spike again, because not going doesn't mean problems don't exist. It simply means many people were nervous to go to the doctor, nervous to go to the ER, nervous to seek help. And I'm concerned that we could have an uptick based off of your explanation.
Yes.
Yeah, and
yes,
so-
Mayor. I'm
Sorry,
sorry. Yes, Mayor, that's in a few slides, we're going to get to that assumption slide. And I think you'll see so that we built that into our assumptions for next year.
Correct. And that's actually a really good point, Mayor. And so just really for the mayor and council, when we look at COVID, the city of San Angelo pays for COVID expenses for members at 100%. And that's partly because of legislation and partly because of the way that the city pays for those.
Because of the CARES Act?
Correct, because of the CARES Act. Yes, absolutely. So when we look at the impact of the claim spend, when Billy brought up, when Councilmember DeWitt brought up that drop down. So part of it's the elective surgeries we talked through. We definitely saw an increase of people using teledoc for telemedicine. So I always like to give the example of if you have a small child that has an ear infection, instead of bringing the child into the doctor and then having to go to the pharmacy to get the medication what you know you need, you can call teledoc and you can have someone over the phone diagnose, prescribe medication, and then call in the prescription for you. So all you have to do is run down to the store and grab the medication. Since people weren't going to the doctor for those smaller types of services needed, we've seen a shift to people using teledoc, which is beneficial. It's less expensive, but it's also convenient. So that shift, behavioral shift, will help our plan in the future. The other is an emergency room utilization decreases. And this is oftentimes we see on plans, people going to the emergency room for an emergency situation. Someone goes in because they have a headache or they have, stomach ache or something along those lines, or they take their child in again for an ear infection because it's 11 o'clock at night and I know I need the medication. So those two things, the teledoc and the behavioral shifts from that, and then the emergency room utilization, will actually help us in the future as well, because people understand the convenience of care that might be more appropriate to the incident that they're trying to treat.
And Mayor, if I could just emphasize what Julie's saying there, one of the first things that Julie and I talked about in probably November of 2018 when I got over here, one of the first things I asked about was ER visits that are unnecessary, as far as, somebody could have went to urgent care or teledoc, and how do we help to, I guess, educate appropriate behavior as far as, utilization of resources. Because, we are self-insured and we're all in this together. So we have been blitzing information as much as we can, trying to educate our population as to, the other things that are available other than emergency room visits. So teledoc, the COVID actually has been maybe the silver lining in a dark cloud that people have, embraced teledoc use. And we think that'll be good for the future as more and more people see that is a viable option to help them again with children with ear infection or whatever. That's just a much more cost-efficient method of dealing with those kind of everyday sort of issues, and the lack of ER utilization will be huge over time. So I just can't emphasize that enough. We've really worked on that education for behavior because we are all in this together.
Well, speaking of that, Brian, I'm glad you brought that up. I would assume that we know enough information, not that it's specific to any employee, of course, but I'm sure we have a couple areas that are are the big issues like diabetes or heart. What are we doing? I know we worked with community before on a wellness program, and I know they'll present sometime later, of course, I'm sure, the wellness program thing again, but how are we dealing with that to reduce our overall healthcare costs since we are self-insured?
I'm so glad you asked that, and Julie can give you a lot more information. But we actually have addressed diabetes was a huge concern for us, as I think it's a huge concern across the U.S. And so we recently partnered with a program called Connect, and I'll let Julie explain a little more of that.
Yeah, so Connect is a diabetes, it's not prevention, it's really a diabetes management program. So for those members on your plan that have diabetes and are that need to have treatment, so basically the program gives them the equipment to monitor their blood sugar levels. It has an app that they can use that will keep that monitor. So let's say I take my blood sugar, it's running low or high. I can set it up where it automatically informs my doctor, where it informs my partner, let them know, hey, Julie's blood sugar is spiking. It includes the test strips and the testing equipment, which oftentimes we find that a lot of times that folks with diabetes end up having a cost barrier to receiving or to testing services because they don't want to use their test strips because things are expensive, so they kind of hoard the test strips. This includes it as part of the program. And then just the monitoring in general, and they have a coach that can help them with their diabetes. And so because it's monitoring them constantly, they'll be able to talk to their coach, and their coach can say, I noticed that you have these spikes at this time of day. Let's go ahead and talk through this and help you manage this better. It's going to definitely be a lot more effective for folks when they go in and get that treatment done. And we're very excited to be able to allow employees to utilize this. The good thing about this as well is your plan already covers the cost of a lot of pieces for diabetes, but the cost of this program is very equal to what you're paying currently.
So we expect some long-term saviors through, again, kind of educating behavior.
Good. I think that's an important, very important. Julia, you can continue. Unless there's other questions from council. I can't see because the screen's up, so I can't tell if somebody's wanting to speak or ask a question. So my apologies if you are.
The other thing just to address for, I'm sorry about that. The other thing to address for wellness is we have some a system now, our clue reporting internal with Holmes Murphy, that we can get into looking at proactive approaches to your actual claim spend. So we can we have your claims data, and we can look to it and determine what types of events will be happening in the future. And then we work with HR to help determine what programming we can put in place to help people before claims become high dollar claims. And so that's definitely something that's a focus for us, and we'll continue to focus on the health of the population. And instead of being more reactionary as most folks have been in the past, we can be a lot more proactive when it comes to how do we address the needs of the member population for the City of San Angelo employees and their families.
Good. I think it's a great program. Continue.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Mayor, I actually have a question. This is
Yes,
for Julie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you happen to know the overall utilization percentage of ER visits per year on a normal year?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I can collect. I have that, so I can pull it up if I need to. But I can certainly get it for you after this meeting. But I will tell you that Normally, when we look at our ER utilization for most clients about your size that I have, about 30 to 40% of the claims that go through an ER are non-emergency claims.
Okay, that's
And
what I was trying to find out, 30 to 40%.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. And if you think about, oftentimes it's because people don't know where to go for care. They don't know what type of care is most appropriate. Sometimes it's affordability for that member, because if you go to the emergency room, you don't have to pay anything up front at the emergency room. But if you go to a clinic, urgent care, or your doctor, you're going to have to pay your copay. And so sometimes it's a cost piece. So we try and find ways to eliminate that barrier through education of employees and letting them know, again, it's your plan. Everyone's in this together as a self-funded medical plan. So you go to the ER for $5,000 versus going to urgent care for $120 to the plan. It's going to affect us all long term.
Right. 30 to 40. That's what I was trying to figure out, of how much non-emergent. So that's kind of what we're going to see on the decrease with the COVID trend.
Oh yeah, we're going to see a pretty significant decrease on the emergency rooms.
The other part of that is the following: many parents work, so they can't get to a doctor during normal hours. So it's the after hours visit.
The middle of the night, yeah.
But the other part is what you said earlier. That's why we've really got to get into this telemedicine thing, so that it's the trip to the ER is not necessary, even if it's after hours. And so I'm going to ask, is telemedicine available after hours?
It is. Telemedicine is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, again, to Brian's point, I guess the silver lining to COVID is that parents were not taking their children to emergency rooms for ear infection during those first few months, especially when we were shelter in place for COVID. And so for those individuals that started using telemedicine during that period of time, I think that they'll continue that behavior shift because of the convenience factor of it, which will help us long-term and hopefully change that behavior.
I would hope we would do something with our employees that is educational, meaning, do we have a flyer that we give to our employees that said, did you know, if it's 9 o'clock at night, you can call this number, or something to make sure people are fully aware of that service.
We are constantly doing that sort of thing, Mayor. We take every educational opportunity that we can to, like I said, to try to enhance behavior in a way that is most efficient and, for everybody. It's we believe it's a win-win for everybody if they use the plan the most efficient and proper way.
Thank you. Okay, Julie.
Okay.
Julia, you can go ahead. Or Julie, is it Julie?
Yes, it's Julie. I mean, officially it's Juliana, but it's not on the screen that way. So when we look at our trend and we come up with our assumptions, so what we do is we say, this is how your plan is running. This is kind of where we're looking to when we're trying to project for the future claims of your plan. We use the medical trend assumption of 6.8 and the pharmacy trend assumption of 7.1. And those trend numbers actually come from a Siegel survey of the large carriers, other brokerage firms. What are you using for this upcoming year? So this is kind of a blended rate of what everyone is using, which is where those numbers come from. We also take into account how your plan is currently running. So when we were looking at that 2.5% trend on your medical and your 15% on your pharmacy, we take that into consideration too and figure out your starting point of where we want to start, and then that's how we project forward. We included what we call the COVID-19 lag. So Mayor, when you were talking earlier about a surgery that wasn't performed during the COVID lockdown period, that surgery still needs to happen. Yes, that's true. However, because of the way that our surgeons and our physicians can take appointments, it's not as though they can double up on one day to be able to make up for those things. So we're going to see more of a trickle effect when it comes to a lot of those elective surgeries. So let's say you had to have a knee surgery, you might be able to put that off a little bit longer than something a little bit more urgent. And so people have been putting off a lot of their surgeries and doing that on a more slow basis. And so it's not going to be a giant jump up in 1 month or 2 months. It'll be a trickle over the next year or so as people continue to do that. The other thing I'll point out is there are some soft tissue injuries, some spinal injuries that might be able to be treated with some less invasive treatments. There is a company called Erosti that is covered under your plan that actually will have a provider in the city soon. That actually works with soft tissue injuries, and so spines, knees, hips, ankles. I actually have bandage on mine right now for an Erosti treatment. It's less expensive and oftentimes can avoid surgeries because of the way the treatment goes. And we always have a lot of musculoskeletal claims for the city of San Angelo, and so this should help. Maybe people that put off surgery might be able to get something that's a little less invasive, a lot less costly, and they can go about their lives on a normal basis a little sooner. The other thing that we assume when we're looking at the plans and the rates for this next plan year is no plan design changes. So when we're looking at this, we determined how the plan was running, put in our trend, put in that COVID lag, and said, if we're not going to make any changes to our plan designs, what does this look like for our rates for our members and going forward? Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, and I think this is probably where I'll take over. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it. So again, this is Brian Kendrick, Director of Human Resources. I feel like I've said that a few times. The total premium line is on this next slide is the one I really would like to direct you to. You'll see that stays consistent among all three of these options at 652.08. That's what we've determined based on all those assumptions we just talked about will keep the plan solvent. And so under option 1, you'll see that 652, we take the current rates and we have increased them for both the city and the employee, and increase those by the 4.4% to make up for that 652.08 total premium. So you'll see that's as it relates to the city contribution, that'll move from the current number of 486.84 to 508.26. That's a 4.4% increase. And the employee contribution rate, and you'll see that number is a blended rate with all of the people that are in our plan across the various, whether it be high, medium, low, employee only, to all the way to employee, their whole family. So that's a blended rate across all of those tiers. And you'll see that it's moving from 137.76 to 143.82. Again, an increase of 4.4%. So that would be a shared burden of that 4.4% increase between the two groups, the city contribution and the employee contribution. And we'll get into a little more detail in the following slides, but this is kind of the overview of this. So the option 2 would be if the city took on the entire burden of the increase, then it winds up being a 5.64% for the city, and obviously a 0% increase for the employees. So that blended rate for the employee stays at 137.76, while again the city contribution per employee per month goes from 486.84 to 514.32. Then as you look at option 3, you'll see that the employer contribution is 486.84, so it's remaining the same, and we've dropped all the burden to the employees' premiums. And because there's more contributed from the city side, that results in a 19.95% increase for the city employees. Again, that blended rate moves from 137.76 to 165.24. And I'll stop there and let you kind of look at this, and then if y'all have any questions, let me know. And again, we'll get deeper into those options and how that looks. But I kind of wanted just to give you a brief overview and see if you have any questions about what I've just described.
Brian, first of all, describe what is ER contribution and EE contribution.
That very good, because I called it city and employee. ER would be the employer contribution, The EE is the employee contribution. Sorry, as I was saying, city and employee, those were the ones I was referring to.
Okay, do I have a question from council? Do I have any questions from council? All right, with that said then, Brian, you can go ahead and reduce the pictures as it looks like no one has a question. Because we now better understand ER is employer and EE is employee. So we're saying that if we do employee city shared 50-50, what is the impact on the budget? And then
Well,
the same thing, go ahead.
Okay, we've got that in future slides. I just wanted to show you how it works from an individual basis first, and then I think actually Kim or Tina can tell you exactly how that impacts the general fund overall. But I wanted to show you how it impacts per, our benefit from an individual perspective first, and then we'll go to the overall number.
Okay.
That's okay.
So just to be clear, if it's an employee and city shared 50-50, it would be a 4.4% increase to one's expense. So they would see an increase in their cost of 4.4%, both for the employee and for the city.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And so if the city picked up 100% of it, we would have a total increase in cost of 5.64% per person.
Yes, from the city's perspective, yes.
From the city's perspective. And then of course, employee only, we get that. So, all right, any questions from council? All right, continue, Brian.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, you'll see that option one in a little more detail. And we just wanted to show basically how this would impact the employees portion so that you could see that from a tiered perspective. So at the top, you'll see the current rates. And this is under that 4.4% shared increase between city and employee. Then you see that 2021, that middle group, that's the proposed rates. So you can see, for instance, the current rate for employee only low, which is that third from the top on the left, you'll see that that's currently $20.44. That moves at a 4.4% increase. That'll move to $21.33 for employee only low. And then if you looked at, say, employee family medium, you'll see it's moving from $872.54 to $910.66. And again, that's just a 4.4% increase across all those tiers, depending on what they elected, what kind of coverage they elected.
So the E, the S, the C, and the F, what are those specifically?
That's a good question, Mayor. Sometimes I look at these so often that I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. So the employee, the E is employee only. That means that they are just covering themselves. The S means that it's employee and spouse. The C means it's employee and children, but not spouse. And the F means it's employee and family, spouse and children. So that's how that breaks down. I apologize. And then at that bottom.
Tom Thompson has a question, so I'm going to just have you take a break, Brian. Let's hear Tom Thompson's question, please.
Brian, as we look at this and we look at what is the most common plan that people use? Are they employee only? Is there family? How does that ratio break down? Which one's the most common?
That's a great question. If whoever's controlling the slides, could you move up 2 slides or move down 2 slides, I guess.
Just 1 second, we'll have it back up.
Looks like I ended the whole show.
Yeah.
It's the current plan enrollment slide.
That one.
You'll see that breaks down among low, medium, and high, employee only, employee spouse, employee children, employee family. And those are the actual elections. So you can see our biggest group, of course, is employee only low, 707. And we don't have anybody in the employee family high. So you can kind of see how that breaks down among those various tiers. And that's
Okay.
how we get that. That's how we get that blended rate that I was mentioning earlier, because it's among all those tiers.
Right. So the heavy is all employee only.
I'm sorry?
The lion's share of it's all employee only.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
And
cool.
that could
Thanks.
be a combination of single people, obviously, or family members who have insurance from where they work as well. So,
Yes, absolutely. But that's a good question.
or parents, so they are doing children out. I mean, there's, combination of those.
Okay, so if we can go back to option 1, I'll see if y'all have any questions about that slide before we move on to option 2. That bottom section is the increase per pay period, not per month. So that's slightly different. The top 2 are month rates, but we wanted to show, we anticipated the question might be asked, how does that affect a paycheck? And so we
I
wanted to
think the big thing is, how does it impact the general fund? And so our big concern is not digging down too far into the details and looking at it on an individual monthly basis and or employee basis, but in combination of knowing healthcare is an issue, what do the various plans 1, 2, and 3, employee and city shared or employee only, what are we looking at in terms of the general fund impact?
Yes, ma'am. And that's, again, I'm laying the groundwork here, and that question, I believe that answer, the cost of these options we put in the presentation, in the next presentation. So the actual cost is in the next presentation, but we could certainly review any question at that point that you have. I'll be here for that as well.
Okay, you're gonna.
Mayor,
Yes.
Mayor, this is Tina Deersky, Director of Finance. The
Yeah.
cost of the general fund for the employer only, in other words, the general fund picking up the entire cost, would be $198,000. The cost if you shared 4.4% employee and 4.4% employer would cost the general fund $154,000. Those are obviously rounded, but we'll get to that later, as Brian said as well.
All right, we'll dig into the details, but I think the other part I wanted to make sure we talked about here is, when we had a part of this presentation at a previous meeting, the numbers were wrong. And so the cost compared to what we saw a couple meetings ago is significantly different than what we're going to look at today.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So one of the things that our consultant group looks at is from a plan year, which obviously makes sense from an actuarial perspective as they look forward, because they're going based on those costs for that plan year, which is a calendar year. So that was presented from a calendar year, not a fiscal year. And that immediately, just off the top, means that your increase is going to drop 25%, because in a fiscal year, we'll have 3 months at the current rate before it's raised. So that's one of the issues there. The other one, there was a typo on the spreadsheet that should have been 508, and it was 518, and that was the other amount.
Brian, this is Tina again. I would say another change would be, I just lost my train of thought.
Across all funds.
Across all funds, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
So
continue.
there were 3 contributing factors to that being a different number last time, as opposed to when we really sharpen our pencils from a budgetary perspective. Okay, so if we want to move to option 2, slide 2, okay. You can see that it's set up the same exact way, and this is, of course, if the city takes on that 5.64% increase. I believe Tina said it was around 198,000 for the general fund. If the city takes on that entire increase, of course, there's no increase to the current rates. So you'll see that the current rates and the proposed rates are exactly the same on that slide. So there's probably not many questions about that slide. That one's pretty easy. Any questions?
Move to the next slide.
Option 3, again, it's a fairly easy one to look at. All the increase is from the city perspective, from the city employee perspective, it's 19.95%. And you can see how that affects every one of the tiers between the current rates, the proposed rates, and again, that bottom one is per paycheck. So it would show how that would potentially impact an employee who had elected those various tiers per paycheck.
Okay.
And if there's no questions there, again, that final slide is the current plan enrollment that shows the breakdown among the various groups. And then again, I think maybe it might be poignant at this point to go back to slide 6 that has those, those numbers on them for those various options. Again, I think from what Tina mentioned, it's around 150,000 if it's a shared burden, and it's closer to 200,000 if it's the city only. And of course, there's no increase to the general fund if the employees take on all the burden under option 3.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for Brian before we move on? Okay, there are no questions. So we will now, okay, that completes item B. And so we will now move into C, which is discussion of matters regarding the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget preparation, including but not limited to 1, the general fund revenue and expenditures, and then 2 other items needing council direction. So let's move into the general fund revenue and expenditures.
Thank you, Mayor. Tina Diersky, Director of Finance. I'm going to present your general fund draft budget. We'll discuss revenues, expenditures, and other items for council's consideration this morning. And as well, we will also discuss some cost-saving initiatives that we have already implemented or that we can discuss planning to implement this morning. Our first slide here shows our property tax rate unchanged at 0.776 per $100 valuation. For fiscal year 2021, valuation certified at almost $5.4 billion, which was a 3.9% increase from the prior year. New properties added to the roll were in the amount of $58 million. Total properties were just over $202 million added to the roll, or total property values, pardon me. We do budget at a 98% collection rate, which is conservative, and we typically every year get very, very close to that 98%, sometimes go over.
Repeat those numbers again. The new property, of course, is the $58 million, and the increase in existing property dollars was how much?
The total net valuation increased just over $202 million.
And that the 58 million comes out of there?
Yes, ma'am. That 58 would be included in that number.
Okay. All right, proceed.
Okay. Sales tax was up. We just received those numbers yesterday, as you're aware. It was up 5.24% in August compared with the same month in the prior year. Year-to-date collections are over fiscal year 2019 by 1.6% and $1.4 million in revenue.
So year-to-date sales tax increase is only up 1.66%. So we're basically flat year over year.
Yes, ma'am. I think that's because we budgeted very consistently with that as well.
No, I'm not talking budget, I'm talking actual. So our actual projected increase year over year is 1.66%.
Yes, ma'am.
So my point is, it's a very flat number, basically. We planned correctly because we planned conservatively, but if you look at the actual increase in sales tax revenue, it will be 1.66%.
Yes, ma'am. Council has done a very good job of holding line on budgeting for sales tax revenue. And so we're actually doing pretty well this year, considering all things considered.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next.
Yes. So for fiscal year 2019 actuals, we came in at $19.9 million in sales tax revenue. Our projected year end for this current fiscal year is just over $20 million. And we are proposing a sales tax budget at this time of just over $18 million.
And what percent would that be to our projected actuals 2019, 2020?
10% decrease at this point.
Not 8, but 10.
Yes, ma'am. We do have some options later that we'll discuss
Okay, thank you.
with that. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I have to move my. Okay, so this is our financial summary sheet, and we can go through these line by line and just let me know if you have any specific questions on these. So the increase of property tax valuations yielded almost $1.3 million in additional sales tax revenue to the general fund. Property tax revenue, pardon me. Sales tax, again, just over $18 million at a 10% decrease from the previous, or from the projected year end. So a decrease of $600,000. Alcohol and bingo taxes budgeted flat. Franchise tax is down $60,000, and that is due to a decrease in television and electric franchise fees. Charges for service is down from municipal court revenues in the amount of $181,000. And then there is a decrease there for the way we're accounting for lake patrol revenue that comes in from the water fund. We're moving it out of that line and into another line within the general fund.
All right, let's talk about alcohol and bingo tax. So the trend on the alcohol and bingo tax right now would reflect that we need to plan that flat.
We actually are basing that on a 5-year trend.
And so we've, for 5 years, primarily been flat.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. And there was a difference of like maybe a negative $1,500. And so we just budgeted it flat.
Okay. And then you just made mention of $181,000 difference in the municipal court.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we talk through that $181,000 and why there would be such a huge reduction in municipal court dollars?
Yes, ma'am. I believe Sylvia's on the line, and I think she usually speaks to that.
Oh, okay.
Pardon me?
Good. All right.
Good morning, Mayor. Can you hear me?
We can, or I can.
Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. Good morning, Sylvia Guadarrama, Municipal Court Director. All revenue is based on the number of citations that are filed here.
Now we can't hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me?
We don't even see her. Oh, there she is. Okay, so now see.
Can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
She's just going to have to get closer to the mic.
Okay.
It shows that it's on.
All right, can you get closer to your mic?
Yes, ma'am. Is that a little bit better?
A little, not great.
Okay. Our revenue is based on the number of citations that are filed in the court. Over the course of the years, we've had several different law changes that have affected the revenue that we are able to collect. And that's basically what it comes down to, are the laws, the legislature changes.
So we're saying that the dollar decrease of $181,000 is relative only to state law changing, not to a reduction in the number of tickets or warrants or citations issued?
It's a combination of all of that, ma'am.
So how much of the 181,000 would be law changing? Because of the law changing?
I would say the majority of it, at least way over 50% of that. Just because the laws that have been implemented require more hearings before we can collect on anything, more hearings before we can issue warrants now, and the laws that have been passed have basically given people more options as far as being able to pay their citations off with a community service program, and we have to make sure that that's made available to them. We have a lot of more people that are declaring to be indigent, and so we lose a lot of money for that.
So if we look at a trend, so charges for services were down, I'm just going to use your number, 181,000. How is that relative to last year? Were we down the same kind of large dollar amount again?
No, ma'am, I don't believe
a rolling number, or is this number all of a sudden hit us really hard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so do I have questions from council for Sylvia on the almost $200,000 difference in municipal court dollar amount? Tom?
So Sylvia, I know you've got a backlog in there. If we ever get caught up with that backlog, is there a chance of this coming back in, of us making up a lot of this? If you get a chance to make up on your backlog? Or are we looking at this as, this is what's going to hit us for 2021 no matter what?
Looking at what we've got so far, kind of going into this, I didn't think it was going to be very good for the next budget year, but as long as we continue the way we are moving forward, I think we're going to be okay. And
I think it won't be any better than what we're looking at here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. As long as that was something very hard to project, the number of citations that we were going to have, going forward. We didn't know with this whole, situation that we're in. But, we are doing what we can to make sure that we're having the hearings and we're making it, collection attempts and what we need to get done.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you, Sylvia.
You're welcome.
Any further questions from Sylvia? So in essence, what we are projecting is that there's no reduction, if you will, in terms of making sure the safety of the citizens continues by oversight from our police department relative to speeding tickets or running red lights or whatever the other issues are. So we're continuing to do the work. It's just a relationship between the state and its requirements and what we have to manage.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So then, Tina, that's 181,000 out of the 407. So, we've got another 200 and almost 30,000 in reduction of charges for services. So can we talk through those?
Yes, ma'am. Part of that is just the way we're accounting for a transfer in from the water fund, just over $250,000 of that. We're accounting for it in a different line item, still within the general fund revenue. And then that is, yeah, that's it. That's the bulk of that amount.
And that transfer of funds from the water department is something we do on an annual basis. This isn't a change in the way that we are booking.
No, ma'am. It's just moved from the charges for service line right here, and it's down in this line now on other.
All right. Any other questions from council? All right, move down to the expenditure lines, personnel.
Personnel is just down across all funds. for various reasons, some of it being related to that workers' comp issue that we've talked about with other funds where we kind of reallocated to a more appropriate allocation setting. But also largely due to the hiring freeze that Daniel has put in place across the city. I believe at the last count, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had 52 positions frozen sometime last week. I think that came out. Is that correct, Brian?
That is correct. We have, 52 that we have frozen, and it would take both a HR review and recommendation to Daniel and Daniel's approval to open.
But I want to be clear on that, because what we're not doing, any job that is relevant and high priority in terms of services given to our citizens, we are filling positions that they are high priority and necessary to continue with the service level.
That's a great point, Mayor. Yes, that of the other portion of that is we have 20, I believe at the time, again, this was probably last week, so it might be a little bit dated. But at the time of the number that I provided Tina, with there being 52 frozen jobs, there were 20 that were posted. And again, we've got a pretty involved process where, some people have to fight for a reason that the position is posted. Then I review that. I recommend it to Daniel to go ahead and post, and he approves those postings. So yes, we are doing the vital services, the ones we need to make sure that vital services go on. Then we are posting those. And we are just kind of asking everybody to work a little bit harder as we go through this process.
Mayor, if I may as well.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Daniel Valenzuela, City Manager. Mayor, also what we do, of course, a lot of the postings are internal, and what we'd like to do is to move personnel around if possible. But again, as Brian did mention, of course, essential personnel, there are certain positions that will had to be hired from outside the city and not moved around. But again, we're very mindful of that. And it's not just for this fiscal year, again, for next fiscal year as well. So even the numbers that you're seeing as far as a reduction, the $250,000, that number could very easily go above $500,000 depending on how long I keep this hiring freeze going and how long we persist with this strategy. So I just want to make sure that I pointed that out.
Well, I think it's an important comment, and I think it's important we look at this because all companies, all organizations have had to reduce the number of personnel and do hiring freezes based off of what's going on in general. So I think it's appropriate that the city follows suit, just as the private sector is having to do, and yet not impact services.
Mayor, I would also like to say that practice has yielded savings year to date of $665,000.
Good job.
And as well, Daniel has implemented a travel freeze, and of course, nobody's really able to travel with the COVID anyway, but year to date, we've realized about $84,000 in savings from that.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Questions from council? All right, with none, continue on O&M.
Okay, so there's a slight increase at O&M of $120,000. About $70,000 of that is in municipal court restricted funds. That would also have an offsetting revenue source, so that increase would be kind of a wash there. There's an increase for dispatch software, and there's also an increase for ambulance software.
Okay, capital.
Capital is decreased slightly. That's just an offset to the O&M. If we increase the O&M line, then we have to sometimes reduce the capital item or the capital expenditures. And transfers out is due to largely and almost completely due to the transfer out for the SAFER grant, the incremental increase for the SAFER grant for this year.
Okay. Any questions? All right, let's move to the next slide.
Okay, we're moving into the part of our discussion where we talk about items for council consideration. We have some requests from the police and fire departments. We'll also have a discussion on equipment replacement, and then we'll finish off with the final discussion on health insurance and how to fund that. So this first slide just kind of shows you what you, I should say, as a council have been able to do for police officers over the last several years. In fiscal year 18, we added 5 additional officers. In 19, we added 5 more officers. and implemented the loyalty pay in steps. And then in fiscal year 20, we had an additional increase there of $232,000, or the equivalent of a 1.9% increase to salaries for the police department. And next up, we have body cameras. I'm guessing that Chief Carter or Chief Howard would want to speak to this to explain the purpose and the need.
Morning, Mayor. Good morning, Council. When we originally purchased the body cameras, it was mainly for the officers. There were uniformed officers, patrol officers. The additional requests we're asking now for the 45 cameras is basically for our criminal investigation division and some of our admin staff that never were equipped with the camera during the first purchase.
Right, did we look for, because I know last year we missed by 30 days our ability to apply for a grant to help pay for these cameras. And I know the Health Foundation has monies for police body cameras. How are we working? What are we looking at in terms of potential grants, et cetera, to reduce some of these costs?
We looked at the grants for body cameras and we were rejected on that. The Health Foundation, we've started that process, but we do not have any kind of any direction as far as whether we receive the grants or not thus far.
So how many police officers do we have?
Currently 167 sworn officers.
Okay. So we currently have 145 body cameras. We want to add another 45, bringing the total number to 190 body cameras. And so the difference between actual existing officers and the number of body cameras is, you want to just talk through that a minute?
That should be additional, roughly 10 over. We're fixing to start another academy and also to give us a little bit of wiggle room for some spares just in case.
Okay. Do I have questions from council?
Have one, Mayor.
Yes, Billy.
Billy DeWitt, single member District 6. Chief Howard, you said we didn't get the grant. Did they give any reason why?
The body camera.
No, they do not give any reason. I'm sorry, Billy. This is Gail Smith, budget analyst. They did not give a reason. They frequently do not. You either get it or you don't. So no, we have no explanation for why we've returned down.
Now I 100% support the police body cameras, but is there any opportunity? Are we continuing to look for additional grants?
Every day, I scan what grants are available. Right now, we have 6 in the pipeline, but for next year. But these are few and far between grants. Out of all the hundreds of grants available, there's very few for police. But no, I continually search for those.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm disappointed we didn't get the grants, but hopefully we'll be able to support this request anyway. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, I'm quite sure the Health Foundation is supporting body camera requests at some level. So what I would ask is that as we continue to move forward on the budgeting process, that we work with the Health Foundation to find out if some of these costs could be picked up by them to reduce our overall costs.
Yes, ma'am.
They do them quarterly. I think they do their grants quarterly. So we look forward to finding out what that can do for us.
Mayor, I have one other question, please.
Yes.
One of the chiefs, what would be the approximate cost of 45 more body cameras?
The breakdown is on that slide right there, and it's over a 5-year period, I believe. The first year, well, there it is right there, $24,500 first year cost. The rest of the years remaining in the contract up to 5 years be $70,000.
So this would be the total cost for the 45 additional cameras.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So year one,
Hardware line is the hardware line? Okay, so
Yes,
all those costs
that's
are,
included.
one is buying the body camera and one is all the other things that come in terms of requirements for the body cameras?
It's not only the camera itself, but license fees and docking station.
Sorry, Billy, I interrupted you. Billy, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's okay. So year one would be what we're budgeting for now, the 2021, 2021 budget. Is that year one?
Yes,
Year
Billy.
one would be 24,500.
Okay.
And Tina, the difference between the 24,500 and the 70,000 on the balance of the years, where's that other 66,000 or 46,000 coming from?
I think that the reason it's less in year one is that Chief Howard worked with the vendor and asked them to try to get it down in that first year because it's a tough year for cities across the nation. And so I believe that's a result of him working with Axon.
That's correct. I spoke with Axon and they worked with us to get the first year costs down, and as well the police department's going to pay the first year out of our own budget.
Let me reiterate that there's been discussion with City Manager Daniel Valenzuela on that first year cost. We do have some federal seizure funds, and we're willing to pay for the first year cost of the 24,500.
So in total, let me make sure I understand this slide. So in total, buying 45 new body cameras, which I'm like Billy, I think the body cameras are incredibly important right now. So the cost of buying 45 more body cameras in total is in excess of $300,000.
The city's cost will be $70,600 or $67 times 4.
All right, and they allow, so if we buy in now, the 45, they allow us to pay it out over a 5-year period? Or explain that to me.
It's spread out over a 5-year period. Yes, ma'am.
And so we pay the vendor over a 5-year period for the 45.
That's correct.
And then we would assume, since we're looking at this over a 5-year period, that there would be no additional needs or requests for body cameras over the next 5 years.
That's correct, unless there's some sort of expansion, and you're always going to have to be adding licenses or cameras if you don't have enough to support the department.
Mayor, one other question. So the body cameras that we currently have, what happens if those go out? Would we be looking at potentially, for maintenance purposes, having additional costs besides what we're seeing here?
Well, we do have a little bit of an overage, so we have a spare to replace the one that's damaged. We immediately turn the damaged one back over to the vendor, and then they send us a replacement immediately.
Okay, so what about the licenses? Do we have any, would we have any additional cost for the ones that we currently have to keep licenses current, or no?
No, it's included in the contract.
Okay. So I'm trying to make sure I understand that the cost we're looking at here would be the total cost for year one that the police department is picking up, but year 2 through 5, this would be the total cost.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So the decision would, if we approve the purchasing of the 45, it basically means we're approving a $305,000, if you will, increase to the budget without a vote on it next year, because we're approving the 5-year plan by the purchase of 45. Is that correct?
It'd be $280,000 with us paying the first year over 5 years.
Not the 305,000?
Not the 305, if we pay the 24.
We're in agreement to pay year one, which is the 24.5, which will leave the city balance over a 5-year period of $280,000.
Okay. Do I have any further questions from council? Okay,
Yeah, I've got,
go ahead. Somebody's getting ready to speak.
it's Tom,
Okay, Tom.
single member District 2. Frank, maybe y'all could help me with the redaction assistant. If that software, is that software we already have, or does each one of these units require more software? I know in some areas where while you're adding hardware, it can still use the existing software. And I don't know this, and this question's been proposed to me by a couple of people, and I just kind of need you to walk through that with me a little bit.
The redaction software, we do receive a lot of public information requests. A lot of the information is not releasable to the public, so there's manual redaction that has to be done. That's painstaking task, and it consumes a lot of man hours. The automatic redaction streamlines that process dramatically, if that answers your question.
Well, I was wondering, so do we already have that, or do we have to have one for every unit?
No, we have redaction software, and it's not one for every unit. No, sir. But like I said, it's a manual redaction that has to be done, and it's very it's frame by frame. So if you want to block a face out, you have to go through the whole video and block that face out. This will automatically do it for you through a menu that you have available to you.
Gotcha. But we already have that, right? And is this
Yes.
a feature for the additional ones we bring on?
It's an additional feature. Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. No, that answers my question. Thanks, guys.
Any further questions? You'll raise your hand or make a sound. I'll call on you.
Mayor, I do want to make a point as well. I know that in talking with the chief, first of all, my appreciation, I know that they wanted to work with us as well to make sure that we had the first year covered, and they did it through his discretionary funds on that. The remainder years, we definitely will be looking for alternative funding sources. I know that we're committed to it regardless if the city council approves this. We have to pay for it, but definitely we'll be looking for any type of grants that will be available for the body cameras specifically. So that should hopefully help us in the future years as well. I'm hoping that with everything that's happened with the rioting and across the country, that the importance of body cameras is at the fore. So I'm thinking that we should see more options for grants in the future. So again, we'll be looking for everything that we can as far as the alternative funding sources. But regardless if council does approve this, it is something that will have to be covered by the general fund, and we cannot find a grant for that.
Well, I think the big question is this is the cost of just the existing 45 that we want to buy. And my concern is, so over a 5-year period, 304, the 285. But what will be the request next year on top of this? So if we approve this, what else are we setting ourselves up for? And I guess we're saying we're going to continue to look for grants, and hopefully they will be out there to help us offset what other potential needs might be. Okay, with that, what's the next slide?
There we go. Sorry about that. My screen wasn't moving. This next slide is for the police department as well. They applied for the COPS grant and were awarded it. And I think I will let them speak to this one as well and the way the program works.
Hello, again, this is Gail Smith, budget analyst for the police department. The COPS grant is awarded for a 36-month period. We applied for 5 officers. This is 5 officers' salary over and above our current budgeted sworn officer rate of $175. So this is officers that are not part of our regular budget. That's what this grant is intended for. Any additional officers above a budget that's already set by the council. We applied for 3 officers to be, I believe 3 officers in the gang unit and 2 in narcotics. One of the requirements for this type of grant is that you hire, all you can ask for is the starting rate for the police officer, not at a particular, in other words, at a recruit level. That is all you can ask for. So this is what we've asked for, is 5 officers at the recruit rate. Now each year, successive year, that amount goes up. The way it's applied for is the first year is recruit, the second year is probationary, and the third year is the PO1. So the increase in funds is due to that. The distribution of the federal funds is determined by the federal grant. This is not our request. This is how they apportion it out. There's $226,000, and I think the purpose of that is to gradually ease the department into assuming more of the burden, or the city to assume more of the burden. So by year 4, one of the requirements of the COPS grant is that officers be continue to be employed for at least another 12 months. So you're really committing to 4 years, not just 3. The portion, the unfunded portion there, is the portion that is not covered by the grant. There is a 25% match minimum requirement for these grants. We do have some grants that are covering a portion of the expense for year 1, for supplies and 1 vehicle. That is part of the grant, other grants that we have currently in pipeline. One's an Edward Byrne grant for body armor. The other one is a grant that is through the state and through the Council of Governments with their approval for a vehicle for undercover. It's a marked vehicle, but they're subdued markings. The vehicle's all in black. The lettering is black on black. They funded on that grant $42,000. We asked for that 1 vehicle. We do not know if we will have a shortfall there, as far as if there's any shortfall as far as totally equipping the vehicle. That will come out of the police budget, standard budget. The vest grant, we have one for $12,300. That's where the 300 comes in. So that will cover the equipping the 5 officers for the first year. We do not re-equip every year. We just resupply any uniforms that they require. The vests, of course, are good for 5 years. So the total then line at the bottom is the personnel, total personnel cost for each year. And then the 67,000 is, I believe that's the vehicle, is it not? The 42,000, less other expenses for officers for supplies. Leaving an unfunded portion the first year of 114,119 and successive years. And again, like year 3, they're shifting the burden to the local authority. And then year 4 is the total burden.
Let me ask one question. I remember when the fire police talked about the SAFER grant, and they presented it to council and asked for our permission to apply for that grant because of the impact. I don't remember you all coming forward and asking council, because I thought that was a policy and procedure that we had in place, to come to council and ask for permission to apply for a grant before we apply for it. Am I mistaken? Am I mistaken on that policy?
If I remember correctly, when we saw the application, we had to expedite. We had 3 to 5 days before the expiration of the grant to even apply for it, if I recall that correctly.
Our expectation was, we had no expectations about actually getting the grant. It was actually a great surprise that we did receive it. The last time that it was applied for was in 2015, and it was not granted. We did not receive an award in 2015. So this was kind of a shot in the dark, to tell you the truth, and we did have to put it together very quickly to get it under the deadline.
Well, I also remember on the fire department one last year, they didn't think we would get it either, but we got it. And so then we had to deal with the issue of getting it, which is a positive thing. On the other hand, what we're looking at now is, you know, a commitment, again, a commitment from council, if we approve this, for over the next 4 years, an addition of $858,000 plus the $304,000. So if we approve these two things, just on a year after year or 4-year window, we're looking at increasing the budget for over $1 million.
It's true.
Based off of these two requests. Any questions from council? Comments from council? With none, move on to the next.
Mayor?
Yes.
Excuse me, Billy DeWitt, Single Member District 6. On the unfunded portion of this, any thoughts that y'all have given for any way to fund this unfunded portion? Hello?
I'm thinking, I'm thinking, Councilman DeWitt,
We have to work with the city.
we just would have to work with the city. I really don't have an answer for you. Like I said, we were very pleasantly surprised that we did receive at least acknowledgement that we could receive the grant. And I do think that we probably are going to have an increase if the city grows in staffing.
Okay.
I don't know.
The other question that I have is what happens, I guess we've already been granted the grant. What happens if we decline it? Or can we?
We can decline it. If we decline it, the chances of us receiving a grant in the future are not good.
Okay.
Very poor.
Can you review with us the crime rate over the past 3 years, the percent increase or decrease in the crime rate?
I'm sorry, you're very hard to hear, Mayor. Are you asking for what the increase in crime is?
Yeah, I know that you have consistently brought the crime rate down. Can you just review those numbers with us?
I don't have them readily available, but I can tell you last month, from the 6 months of this part of the year, we're down 10% compared to last year, crime rate. And I think it's important for me to mention where we should be as far as manpower and my goal over the last 4 years to increase the manpower. A city our size and population, we should have a minimum of 190 officers. If you remember correctly, in 2016, my goal was to increase the officers 5 per year. City council was authorized 165 in 2016. We're now up to 175. We've increased 10 bodies over a period of 3 years. As you recall, last year we bypassed the 5 officers and we spent the money on body cams. So this COPS grant goes hand in hand with the goal and the vision that I've had and presented to council over the last several years.
What is the relationship between population growth and additional officers versus reduced crime with existing officers?
It's just based on volume. That's with the federal level and the state level. They base the population on the number of officers, and that's done nationwide.
And I know they certainly put, you know, those numbers out there, Chief Carter side, but how many cities use those numbers as a staffing review? I don't know this, so I'm asking, and it's probably tough for you to answer that because it's kind of out of the blue question, but I would assume that the most important thing that we look at is reduction in crime. And if we continually have a reduction in crime, what's the relationship between needing more officers when our existing officers are already doing a terrific job of reducing crime? And I would say you guys, obviously with your ability on a year over year, you have done a great job, a really good job of reducing crime. And I want to constantly say that, because if you have reduced 10% over last year's, that's a terrific accomplishment. And so I'm trying to keep in perspective the need for more when existing is doing a terrific job. Particularly in a year when budget dollars are very, very limited. Sure. And I bring that up because we're tight budget.
Most cities look at population and number of officers per thousand, and that's the way that number is figured. There's a specific formula used to come up with that number. And as far as the decrease in crime, we're doing a wonderful job with the personnel we have. Yes, but we can do better, and that's what we'd like to do. And granting additional officers would pave the way for us to make a bigger impact.
All right, I think Harry has a question, then I have some more questions. So Harry.
Thank you. Harry Thomas, Single Member District 3. Just a real quick comment, and I want to follow along with what the mayor said and what Ms. DeWitt said, and that is, I think we need to find a way that we find these fund these additional 5 officers. The challenge is going to be is how do we get there, and I would challenge the chiefs to continue to look at grants for these types of things to help offset that cost to the citizens, to the city. And I really want to make sure that we're moving towards that goal of 5 additional officers. But I also think in the down year that we're having and projected to have in fiscal year 21, I want to make sure that we're able to do that in such a way that we don't impact other departments within the city. We're already challenged with 52 positions that we're down, and I know that we want to make sure that we've got critical services continuing. But even in those non-critical services, citizens expect to get things done, and they're not going to wait 2 and 3 months because we don't have the people. So I would like to get this done, but I'm also going to challenge the chiefs to see if there's not additional grants in year 2, 3, and 4 that we can help offset this $858,000.
I want to be very clear that I am very supportive of our police department and the leadership in our police department. But I know that all of us constantly are watching what's going on across the country. And even though I know those charts that you're referring to that say based off of our population, we should have 190 officers. In so many cities across the country right now, city councils are reducing funding for the police departments, not increasing, but they're decreasing. And so this is kind of an unusual issue for us because at a time period when decreasing monies for police departments, we're looking at a request for increases. And I say this outside the conversation of, I believe strongly in our police department. I believe strongly in the leadership of our police department. But I also know we are at a tight budget, that many cities across the country are reducing the budgets, which I'm not sure is a very smart decision. But many cities are not increasing. And here we are looking at over a 4-year window of $1.1 million in increases without any other conversation about any other needs or requests. And so that's, again, I say that with great respect for the leadership and what is happening in terms of our assistant police chiefs and their leadership and the good job that you're doing. That being said, it still requests for more money.
Mayor Gunter, may I make one comment concerning it? And I appreciate very much your comments. I think we're going to see a backlash from the in some of these communities that understaff the police at a later time. And the climate that when we originally applied for this grant, this was way back in the first part of March. So the climate, the political climate, the state of the country, everything has changed dramatically since that time. It's not something we could have foreseen when we applied for the funds.
That's a very valid comment, but bringing that up, you're telling me that we applied for this back in March and this is August. I think along the way, maybe we should have been brought into that conversation before today.
We did not receive any notice of award until late August, until August.
I know you didn't receive notice of the award, but back in March you applied for the award, and I'm just saying it would have been nice before this budget meeting to present to us the grant because you got it, instead of informing us earlier in this process that you applied for it.
Mayor, if I may, this is Lane Carter.
Yes, go ahead, Lane, sorry.
I think from the past, I think everybody knows how I feel about funding our police and our fire department. I just want to get this out there that I think it is an outstanding opportunity that we are able to find a grant to be able to fund the extra personnel that we've been needed since we've been severely understaffed for years. I know other towns who are defunding. I don't know what the levels of their officers were in relation to their population, but with us being from behind, and I kind of vaguely remember asking if there were grants for the police department when the SAFER grant came by for the fire department, wondering if we could do the same as well for our police. I understand that there's probably going to be some later on year budgetary expenditures for it to be able to fund it. But we've got some money coming in, $227,000 off the grant, $54,300 off another grant. I think it's time that we trust getting our police officers to where they're needed, along with the body cams, and get them fully functioning. That way, as we grow as a city, there's no way that we will not be protected.
I think I speak for all city council members that all city council members support our police department. This is not about not supporting and not believing.
No, I'm definitely not. I'm just getting that out there. I just wanted to state that, get it on the record. I know we all support it, and it's hard that we have to try to find a way to come up on year 4 with the $364,000 to be able to fund. But we've got a grant coming in, and I just think it's an outstanding opportunity.
I don't think anyone denies the fact that when we have an opportunity to apply for grants and receive the grants, it speaks highly of the quality of grant application that was submitted, because you don't get them awarded unless the quality of the grant writing and the need is not there. So again, it is with total support of our police department, total support of the work and effort, and total support of the leadership that exists. And I want to make that very clear.
Absolutely.
It's not, there's no negative with that. I'm just trying to figure out where the funds are going to come from, and knowing that this year alone, we're only talking about the 2021 year, and 2 years, 3 years down the road, we're going to have some big numbers that are not going to be able to be negotiated. And I just want to say, when we accept, we've got to also be aware of the commitment we're making on future councils for funds, because we are committing to those funds with approval.
Tina, what's our overall, what was our overall property tax valuation increase?
Over
and the percentage coming to us.
over $1.2 million. And to speak to this as well, Mayor, we'll have four different options or scenarios, if you will, coming up later to try to discuss some of these needs and if we want or can fund them.
I also want to speak to Lane's question about property tax, because what we are going to be looking at going forward in the 2021-22 budget is a huge amount of properties today that are on the tax rolls that will be taken to nonprofit status with Shannon's purchase of Community Hospital and all their adjoining properties, as well as several other things that have happened in the city, including the Council of Governments purchasing a large property that is taxable now and won't be. So what our property tax valuations and dollars look like now, we're going to have a huge hit to taxable properties in the next budget year of 2020 or 21-22, because all of those properties are going to go into nonprofit status.
Tina, is there a way that you could get those numbers for us as a projection by the time?
She has them, Lane.
She has them? Okay.
Yeah, it was from the Shannon community, it was about $300,000 to property tax revenue.
And then you have the Council of Governments purchase of the oil field property. So I think that's 100,000. And then you've got Children's Advocacy Center that purchased properties that will come off of the property tax. You've got a building. There's a lot of property tax, currently taxed properties that will go into nonprofit next year. And we will have a hit on property tax dollars next year.
Mayor Billy DeWitt, single member District 6. Is that not information we need in discussing budget request?
Billy, I did call the appraisal district and discuss that with them. It will not impact the 2021 budget that we're discussing right now. If it does, or when it does have an impact, it would impact the following fiscal year.
Okay, but if we're making decisions about funding out about 4 years, wouldn't that be information we'd need to have now?
We will not and cannot have that information until probably around April is when they start doing property valuations, and that's when they would value all of those properties. And then next year in July, on the 25th, we'll get our certified values for that following year.
But we can project them now, Billy, is the point. And that's the reason I've had Tina look at the impact of the community Shannon Hospital issue. We did take a look at, I think, the Council of Governments purchase of the oil buildings and land there. And then, of course, the Children's Advocacy Center that will be impacted as well. So you're probably looking at an almost $500,000 impact from existing tax properties into nonprofit status.
So if we're looking at $500,000, are we talking about the actual revenue that the city would receive, or are we talking about the taxable values of the property?
That would be the taxes that the city would receive in property tax dollars.
Okay, thanks.
All right, next slide. Frank and Chief Carter, I think we're moving on to the fire department if there's no more questions from council on the police department requests. So thank you. And let's move into fire department and Chief Dunn.
Okay, Mayor, again, this is this slide goes over some initiatives that have already been covered by City Council in the budget. In fiscal year 18, we added 8 additional firefighters, and then the SAFER grant was approved the following year with those totals as well for each of those years. And this current 2021 budget, we're funding a total of $385,148 for that SAFER grant. So the only request we had from the fire department this year was to continue the peak hours ambulance at a cost of $263,900. And I'll let Chief Dunn speak to why this is necessary and how well it's working. But we are, just so you know, recommending to fund that with that charity care reimbursement that we're still receiving. We have received confirmation that we'll receive it this year, and so we feel comfortable with using that to cover it if the council chooses to do so.
Morning, Mayor, Council, Fire Chief Brian Dunn. The peak ambulance, what it does for the city is that we're making most of those runs during the 9 to 6 that we're staffing the peak ambulance. And what this does, instead of putting that 7th out crew in place or full-time 24-hour crew, this is about a third, a little more than a third, probably 40% of the cost to cover that instead of putting that other one in place. If those utilization times go up, what happens is we ended up shutting down fire trucks to man ambulances because we start running out of ambulances during some of those times.
And you go ahead and comment, Chief Dunn, on the funding with the charity care, which generally pays for that, correct?
Yes. So what it's been called in the past is a Medicare supplement. The federal government's changed the name of the program. It's now called charity care. And we've got confirmation. I believe it's 400,000 and change that we're going to receive from that. Does that sound right, Tina? And this money doesn't, we'll get final confirmation. They give us their estimate, and usually they're pretty much spot on. You'll get final confirmation at the end of September, and then the city generally receives the money in early October.
Any questions for Chief Dunn from council? Okay. Thank you, Chief Dunn. We'll move into the equipment replacement, and this is, every time we have a city council meeting, we very often have in the consent agenda things that say budgeted items, replacement of X, Y, and Z. And so what I wanted for us to be able to see today is what is currently in the budget that we're reviewing in terms of dollars by area and what kind of quantity of units, new purchases of equipment we would be looking in as we approve this budget.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Council. This is Shane Kelton, Director of Operations for the city. We kind of had a brief conversation back when we were discussing our enterprise funds. And so today we brought back not only for what the general fund is looking at, but we also brought back so we could see total for general water, sewer, and the stormwater funds. As of right now, we believe that these are going to be the primary funds that are going to be purchasing equipment. If something happens later in the year in another fund, the airport fund or one of those, where they need a vehicle, that'll kind of be a one-off, but right now there's no projections for replacement in those funds currently. You can see the general fund, we currently have budgeted $1.3 million, water fund $674,000, sewer $458,000, and the stormwater fund $460,000. We kind of have the number of units broken off by fund is what our expected replacement will be. General fund will be 28 units is what we're expecting to replace right now, plus our leased equipment. We mentioned this back in the enterprise fund workshop that this year our leased equipment, which we call our yellow iron, which is our motor graders, our backhoes, that type of equipment. We have gone through our last lease and 5-year lease. We're into year 6 of that equipment, and it's time to refresh and replace that equipment as well. So we will be going out for bids and also a RFP for municipal leasing options for this equipment. And so you can see, and we'll get into leased equipment, or we'll show you how much we're looking for as leased equipment in the next slide. But as you can see, as we move on through water, 16 units plus the leased equipment, sewer 2 units plus the leased equipment, and stormwater looking at 6 units plus lease equipment as well. So next slide, please. We broke this down by type, equipment type, so we kind of know what we're looking at across the board from equipment type. You can see up at the top we have it broke down by the fund, and then the totals off on the far right there. We're looking at in our lease units, we're looking at a total of 35 leased units, and this will include anything from again motor graders, a lot of backhoes, skid steers, compact track loaders, wheel loaders, those type of things. So it's a combination of all of that. And we'll bring that back to you later in this next fiscal year. Just looking at 1 quarter ton pickup, which a Ford Ranger, a Chevy Colorado, that type pickup. Half ton pickups, we're looking at 11 across the city. Medium duty pickups, looking at 13. That's going to be your 3/4 tons and your 1 tons. Mowers, 4 mowers, 1 trailer for animal services. Patrol units for PD, we're looking at 11 patrol units this year, 1 patrol motorcycle, and 1 unmarked unit for PD coming out of the general fund replacement fund. Next slide. Looking at 2 boats, 1 for the Lake Police, Lake Patrol, and another one for Lake Operations. Looking at 2 tractors, 15-foot shredder for 1 of those tractors, 2 light towers for the water department, water distribution, and sewer collection bunch, another 6-foot shredder for the stormwater department, 1 street sweeper in the stormwater department, a back truck for the sewer department, a small UTV, a Gator type, John Deere Gator type vehicle, and then 1 ambulance kind of rounds out what our expected equipment purchases replacement are going to be this year. Of course, I want to also, this is proposed between now and the time that everything gets bid out and we bring back. We could have other issues arise that we need to kind of switch something out that was here for something else that may have been taken out of service due to a complete failure. And so, you know, these numbers are, although this is our best estimate right now, these are somewhat flexible in what we will be doing as time goes along throughout the year. And of course, if any chances come up for any grant opportunities or other funds become available for equipment replacement, the need is definitely greater for equipment replacement than we actually have the funds for. But based on our funding right now, this is our most critical needs that we have on the books right now.
Well, I think it's very important that you've pulled all this together for our overview, because I think it makes it easier for us to understand when we go to consent agenda and we say these things are budgeted. We kind of know what the overview is going into the budget, and also obviously understanding that things happen and decisions have to be made to replace equipment because of accidents or wear and tear, whatever that doesn't happen. But this is a great overview. I'm assuming we do a spreadsheet of an Excel spreadsheet of some sort that lists all the equipment that we have by department and understands sort of the life of that equipment, or traditional life of the equipment, so we can kind of look at on an annual basis what we're looking at. Is that how we come up with this information?
Yes, ma'am. We start off with, oh gosh, it's probably, if we printed it out, it'd probably be a 20 or 30 page document which is the base document we start off on. And then we start narrowing it down by department and then by division. And we just keep narrowing it down and working through. And it's easy when we start looking at, and just by age and our primary sorting factors, just by age and miles or hours, depending on the type of unit we're looking at. We start getting those base criteria in, and then we start narrowing that down. And finally, you know, when we start getting down into the very end of it, you know, we're basing it off of cost per hour or cost per mile on that unit versus its age, and, you know, a lot of different factors. But yes, ma'am, it takes Ryan Kramer and myself and and Patrick, it takes us, a good 3 or 4 weeks to go through all of that data and pare it down and narrow it down, and based on the current conditions of each piece of equipment.
Well, thank you.
It's quite an extensive.
Yeah, I know it's a big project, but obviously from budgeting perspective, we need it. I think that Billy has a question. So Billy, can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Shane, how many boats do we have and what is the life expectancy of the boat?
There's multiple boats in different kinds of boats in multiple divisions. In lake operations, we currently have 2 boats that they use in lake operations. And we're getting anywhere from 10 to 15 years out of those boats, depending on the boat. And then also we have 2 boats in the lake patrol, and they're getting, gosh, some of them will get 10 years, some of them will, we've even had some in the past go as long as 20 years. We try to replace them prior to that. We really don't want them to get much over about 10 years old, but as budget constraints come about, sometimes those get pushed out further than what we would like. But we try to replace them about every 10 years.
Okay, so these 2 are strictly for the water department that you're looking at replacing?
One of them would be lake operations, and then the other one would be lake patrol, which is the police department boats. But the water fund supports those 2 operations.
All right. And exactly what is a light tower, Shane?
The tower, it's a portable light tower. It's basically just a portable lights. It's a generator with a stand of lights that mostly our water distribution and our sewer collection crews use on leaks at night. When we have a leak in the nighttime hours, they can take that tower out there, and that way they can continue to work in safe lit conditions at night.
Thank you.
Other questions from council? Does anyone have questions? Tom, you? Tom Thompson, you're on.
Hey, Shane, wasn't there at one time we had some tracking software we would put on these pieces, and we identified pieces of equipment that we did not use much and get, we would take them out of the system. Do we still have that software in use today?
Yes, we do. And that's, we use that quite regularly. Almost all equipment, not all equipment in the city is GPS, but almost all of our equipment is GPS, and we track it and we monitor miles and we monitor hours on all of it. And we generate those reports and send it to the directors and the division managers.
Right. So it would be suffice to say that it's probably allowed you to decrease our inventory of this over the past couple of years, or I'm hoping so.
Yeah, the first 2 years we had this in service, we decreased our fleet by 65 units based off utilization alone.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure that was still in effect, and you back that up. Thanks, Shane.
Yes, sir.
Great comments. Thank you for that. I think that's important to understand the impact of that software. Council, do I have anybody else raising your hand or wanting to ask a question of Shane? Does not look like it. Shane, again, thank you for doing this, because this will help us move through agendas going forward, better understand what we're doing. It's very beneficial, and thank you for the work it took to come up with all of this and to figure out the budget thing. Great work. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, the next slide is, I believe we start to review and start to make decisions about what we want to support and put into the new budget, and look at what the impact is and whether it works in total for our projected revenues.
Yes, ma'am. First, I'll just remind you of what the amounts were for health insurance. For the 4.4 shared increase to both employee and the city was $154,000. With a 0% increase to employee and 5.6% to the city, it was $198,000.
I'm going to ask this question because I think it's come up before. What we do, the decision that we make is specifically to the dollars. So if the dollar amount is wrong here, we're saying that in the budget, we would be willing to spend 154,454 or the 198,037. So we are approving the dollar amount.
That's correct.
Because there was a question before, confusion about the dollar amount or a percent. I just want to make sure we're clear.
Okay.
Okay.
Tina,
Yes.
it's Tom Thompson. So what we're really looking at here is 44,000. If whether you're going to pay 198 or 154, that's right. So the question is the 44,000.
That's right.
All right. Thank you. That's all.
And Mayor, to your point, these are estimates, but we expect them to be very close to these numbers. And so, yes, you're right. You are approving a dollar amount.
And I just want to make sure that's clear. That's the dollar amount we're approving. So do I have questions or comments or input from council on these two considerations?
Harry Thomas, single member District 3. Just a real quick, and I think a follow-up of what Tom Thompson said is you know, the 154,454, it's going to be paid one way or the other. The difference between that and the 198 is 44 that Tom talked about. During these particular times, if we can find that kind of money for this particular budget, I'd like for the city to fund that increase and not spread it across the employees that have already been impacted in one way or another. Now, having said that, I'm not sure if Tina's got that money located or not, but that's what I would like to propose.
Do I have comments from other council members?
Mayor, Tommy Hebert.
Yes, Tommy?
I agree with Harry. I'm really holding my thoughts until we get, I'm going to say to the end where Tina says, here's the total requests, here's the money that's available, and you know, we can do this and we can't do this. So I agree with Harry on this one, but I'm kind of holding my thoughts until we get really to the very bottom line here. I haven't seen anything bottom line yet, so.
Okay, very valid. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments right now?
Mayor, Lucy Gonzalez, single member District 4. I was also wanting to know where do we have the money? Do we have the money to fund it completely, the whole amount? Do we have that money?
Mayor, are you ready to move on to those slides then?
Yeah, because it seems like everybody has a point of view, but we don't see the big picture yet. And the big picture might make us go back and re-review some of these issues and make final decisions.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we have marginal revenue of $15,440 this year. That is including the 10% decrease to sales tax. And so I have 4 options for you. These first 2 are really just to kind of show you how much the total of the funding need is. Then we have the last 2 slides show you the solution to these scenarios. So the first one includes funding the COPS grant for year 1 for the local match, and then funding health insurance at the 50-50 of the one with the $154,000. And with that, we'd be short $253,000. And the reason you're only seeing those 2 lines, I just want to remind you that we had other alternate funding sources for the other 2 requests that we did discuss. And on this next slide shows the city picking up all of the health insurance increase. And with that, you can see we'd be short almost $300,000. Again, that's with a 10% decrease to sales tax. This third option includes the 10% decrease for sales tax. The same 2 requests, but instead of being short the 296, we could, as one option for a solution, carry over $296,000 of that $1.4 million surplus that we talked about earlier for sales tax. And finally, if we budgeted at an 8.5% decrease, we would balance the budget.
Okay, but you say option 4, marginal revenue of 300, so that's the 8.5% decrease in sales tax, not the 10%?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, let me just go back to option 3. I don't really want to take $296,000 out of the marginal sales tax, because one of the big issues that we hear on a constant basis from our citizens is, what are you doing about streets? We need to focus on the streets. In the past 2 years, we've been able to take sales tax revenue over and above the budget and give it to Shane Pelton to continue to work on and improve our streets. And so I would very much not like to take any money out of that marginal sales tax dollars to fund these issues. I think it needs to stay in the street. We need to authorize that money to go to streets. I think it's a huge, big, important item, and I know we hear about it on an ongoing basis. What I do believe that we could do, and I think the option 4, where instead of having a 10% decrease in sales tax revenue, we plan for an 8.5% sales tax revenue, paying for the police cops grant, the local match, and then budgeting $198,000 for the health insurance, giving us a surplus of the $3,900. And I think this option 4 addresses, for me, a conservative overall plan based off of sales tax revenue, supporting our police as we want to continue to support our police, and supporting our personnel by covering their insurance increases, and still leaving the city in a good position financially. Those are my comments. I'm open to comments from council.
Mayor Harry Thomas, single member District 3. I agree, but I want to make sure that as we get into fiscal year 21 and we see that sales tax decline more than that 8.5%, we've got a way that we can address both the first year local match with the police cops grant and funding the health insurance. So I don't know if there's a combination of option 4 and option 3, but I mean, I understand that this is certainly just setting the groundwork for the budget, and budgets are fluid and we're going to change them. But I do want to make sure that we've got a way to cover that if for some reason or other our sales tax is greater than minus 8.5%.
Daniel, I want to speak to that because I want you to talk through what we've had to do over the past few months with what's going on and our constant review of expenses to keep in line any negative impact to sales revenue versus budget. So Daniel, you want to talk to that and make sure council understands how you're managing on a day-to-day basis.
First of all, I'd like to start off, and I do want to mention that the 8.5% is still a very conservative number. Based on trends and based on projections that we've looked at, we feel pretty confident that the 8.5% is not going to be an issue moving forward. I will tell you that back in, it's recent in 2014 that we had a shortfall in our sales tax revenues. We did everything we needed to do as a city staff. We met, we strategized, and we developed plans to reduce our expenditures. And again, part of what I'm doing right now with a hiring freeze and other expenditures that we're cutting back, we could very easily implement as well to make sure that we come out in the black again at the end of the year. In the years that I've been here and working very closely with council members and their finance department's done a great job as well, we've always made sure that we're in the black, and that is our responsibility. Again, I feel very confident with the 8.5%. I think 10% was a very, very conservative number. So I really do feel that 8.5% is very achievable with the numbers that we're seeing right now and moving forward. Again, we'll monitor this every single month to see where we are and make adjustments as we go. So I do feel confident that we can reduce our expenditures if need be.
Billy, did you have a comment? I think someone was talking a minute ago. Someone have a comment or question for Daniel or Tina, or comments about any of these options 1 through 4?
No, Mayor, I didn't have a question My only comment would be that I support option 4.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? With no other questions or
I have
comments?
a question, Mayor.
Oh, sorry, Tommy, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Tina, we haven't seen a slide yet, or maybe we're not going to. We haven't even discussed any in potential salary increases for employees. Is that something that is not included in any of your options?
I believe, Tommy, that we have approached this budget with no increases. It seems to be a year when, based off of the statistics, we can't do it. And when you take a look at the number of citizens who have had such a negative impact on their income, their salaries, I think it would be wrong for the city to approach increases in salaries, particularly with us picking up the health insurance costs. Too many citizens have had financial impacts, and I think we need to be very considerate of that.
I have a question, Tina. You know, if council, and I may be the only one thinking this direction, could we say come back in 3 months, 6 months, one or the other or both, and say, okay, here's what's going on with our sales tax number. Could we then say we will then allocate, use a portion of that? And I heard what the mayor, I heard you about the streets. Streets are obviously a high priority for me too, but I think we also need to consider our employees. Tina, could we come back in 3 months or 6 months and say, here's what's going on with our sales tax, and then potentially use part of that for an increase at some point in the future this year or next year?
Yes, Tommy, if you request that to be on the agenda, we could put it on there quarterly, biannually, however you would like for us to do that.
I'll just throw that out for discussion for the council. That's something I would like to see, and it still may not happen, but I would like to look at our sales tax numbers to see, you know, then we can see what it would take at that point in time to do something for our employees. I feel pretty strongly about that. So I'll just toss that out there for other comments or discussion.
I value the employees tremendously, and I value how hard our citizens work to produce the sales tax revenue and the bills they're facing with their property taxes. I think we have to be considerate of what's going on in the entire city and people's individual lives. And I also want to be incredibly consistent and conservative as the following. The number one complaint we have over and over and over again is, when are we getting the streets fixed? When are we getting the streets taken care of? When are we getting this done? The streets are a huge, big, important item in citizens' lives. And we've got to keep very focused on moving up and moving as fast as we can on these streets. Okay, any other questions or comments from council?
Mayor Harry Thomas, single member District 3. I want to applaud Tommy and say that that's a unique approach. And I think if we come back every quarter and take a look at that, then we can make some decisions on what we can do with any sales tax increases. And I don't disagree with the mayor on the streets, but I can tell you, $500,000 really is not going to make a big impact on any one street project that we're going to do. So if we can utilize it in other ways to benefit the city employees, I would certainly like to take a look at it. Anyway, that's just my comment.
$500,000 will fill a lot of potholes. Just saying. Other comments?
Mayor, I'd like to make a comment. Here, as far as what's been accomplished this past year, I do want to give a lot of credit to our city council, mayor, our city staff, finance department. There's very few cities right now that will actually be putting money in the fund balance next year. There's a lot of cities right now that are looking at really extreme measures to cut back because they didn't budget conservatively in the past. And this has always been our approach with the city of San Angelo. So to be looking at the potential of actually putting $1.4 million in the fund reserves for next year, that should be applauded. That's actually an effort from everybody working together to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible, and that's something that we've continued to do. So again, just wanted to point that out. That is something that I'm proud of. I'm glad that we have the leadership and the staff that work so well together to ensure that we're doing everything for our citizens to provide the service we have, but do it in a fiscally responsible manner.
Thank you. All right, with that, Tina, is there anything else?
That's it for this portion, Mayor. We do have a couple of slides to talk about expenditure cutting measures, if you want to talk about those today.
Sure.
Okay. So the current cost saving initiatives, like I said, that we've already initiated, include adjusting the hiring practices, travel restrictions, again, referring to the hiring and travel freezes, and then utility management. That's something that Ron Lewis facilitates. Is Ron on the call? Do you want to talk about what that utility management means?
I'm here. Mayor, Council, this is Ron Lewis, Facilities Maintenance Manager. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I lost my picture to see y'all. I was watching y'all too. So I don't have these slides prepared today, but I think I was just going to kind of want to go over in general. Over the past many years, back to 2007, we have, I think every year, signed an agreement with a consulting firm that works for AEP Texas. And they brought that to us in 2007. It's a way to incent us to make improvements to our air conditioning, our roofing, and our lighting programs to be able to cut costs. Their goal by statute in the state law was to cut generation for electricity costs. So what we've done is we've gone in and they've helped us to identify projects that we had funding for at the time to be able to, well, many of the projects, there was new equipment brought. So many of the projects were, of course, in the time frame when City Hall and the community development buildings were redone back in 2010-11 time frame. So we received actual dollar amounts, checks from AEP directly to us that for rebuilding those buildings or renovating those buildings. And we have over the years received monies and put those into an account that we turned around and spent those incentives on other projects and to decrease the consumption of electricity there. So we've done a lot, and it's mostly been by fact of renovations and replacing air conditioners and new roofs. So the cool roofs, as you may be aware, all of you, of the white roofs, of the single ply membranes, those really cut down the heat load on the building. So we've done a lot of good in that area. And we have automated systems that let us monitor our air conditioning and adjust schedules. And that makes a big difference because our air conditioning systems are not like you and I have at home. They don't come off and on. In most cases, they run with chillers and boilers, and they're always pumping water through the building. And the air handlers are what can be regulated, but there's always air blowing in most of the buildings we have that had been renovated. So we continue to work. We have some projects underway, very small ones in the sense of what the money will be paid to us, but the savings can be calculated out much better. More recently, you're aware that you may be aware that we replaced the chiller at the police department. And so we'll start seeing savings on that. We already are now because it's been actually hooked up, I think, 2 weeks ago now. And we have some other lighting projects going on. A couple of years back, the operations department funded some replacement lights over in the what we call City Hall Annex now. And that was a big return to us initially, but also in savings of electricity. And we've been watching our electric bills. Recently, we looked back at the past and saw that our reductions in our costs for that building have been significant, from an average of about $5,000 a month to about $4,000. So plus or minus, but that's a big difference when you can save that much electricity. Some of that is about air conditioning systems. Some of it is about controls or thermostats, as you'd say, a control system that's computer-based. So I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I can provide information to you. I didn't prepare slides. I do have stuff I can get to you if you want to talk about it more specifically.
Well, Ron, what I really want to do, and I thank you for that update, is to make sure that we have an ongoing awareness day after day about how to save on utilities. And so it's being aware, it's a conversation to make sure everybody is aware on an ongoing basis about how to cut utility costs. Turning off lights, adjusting temperatures down, setting a minimum temperature per room, making sure if the room's not being used, the lights are off, the air conditioner's reduced. There's just a lot of day in and day out, making everyone aware of how they can impact costs.
Mayor, what you see on the screen right now is really, there's still certain measures that we're working through that are very preliminary. We're not quite ready to discuss at this point, but we just wanted to put them out there just to let y'all know that these are discussions that are being had and strategies being put together to implement as well. But again, just want to give you a quick summary on those, or a quick bullet point on those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions or comments from council? Okay, thank you. Tina, what else?
Tina,
I wanted to come back to this slide quickly. That $3,900, we will we have to balance. We have to adopt a balanced budget, so we will need to move that $3,900 into one of the lines. My recommendation would be to put it in health insurance, since that could slightly fluctuate when we get actual numbers, and then if we don't need it, it would just fall to fund balance.
Yeah, and I want to make another comment as we talked to one of the things that came up. If you take a look at our performance on sales tax on a quarterly basis, what we can't do is get into the business of thinking if one quarter has a good increase, that the second quarter won't have a decrease to plan. And so when you're trying to make decisions on a quarterly basis instead of an annual basis or a 6-month basis, dynamics change in economies, and we need to be very careful about what we're doing. So with that, I'm assuming no one would have a problem with moving the 3934 into health insurance, unless someone has another idea about where to move that 3900. Whether it's in equipment under Shane's world, is it something else that has been reduced that we might need?
Mayor, Tommy,
Yeah.
I think Tina's correct. I think that the health insurance line item is a good line item, because those numbers may be as fluid as any numbers that we have.
Yeah.
So I would agree with Tina.
Okay. With that, Tina?
Okay, this is the final discussion item, Mayor. We have, I don't know if Julia, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to explain this?
Go ahead.
Okay. We have new laws in place, and right now our council meetings are scheduled for the 1st and 15th. We are considering asking council to move them to the 15th and the 29th, as we are waiting for kind of finalization on some of these rules that we're having from the new legislation. If that is not an option or a possibility, we can still keep them on the 1st and the 15th, but we're trying to push them out a little bit so we have more time to understand what we need to do.
Well, let me ask you a question. Right now, based off of the information presented, I'm believing that council would want to leave the property tax levy at the 0.776. And if that is true, could we not today vote to accept a proposal to leave the property tax at 0.776 as it is?
Teresa, do we have to have a public hearing on that, correct?
Yes, we do. We have.
Okay.
That's part of the reason we're asking for the delay, to arrange the public hearing.
All right, well, here's going to be my comment. I know people make plans, and so most of us have blocked out on our calendar the first and third Tuesday of every month. So I guess everyone should take a look at their calendars and see if that right now presents a problem.
This would be the 3rd and 5th instead of the 1st and 3rd. And like I said, if we have to do it on the 1st and 3rd, then we will make it work. We'll figure it out.
We can think about, if everyone will look at their calendar and their planned trips that they've committed to, on Tuesday at the city council meeting, we can make a final decision on this, and we'll put that in there to do. So you have a chance to look at your family's lives and what you've committed to in terms of travel or vacations or business meetings, etc. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What we'll do. All right. Tina?
Cool. That's all I have, Mayor.
With that, we will adjourn this workshop and thank everyone for their comments and participation.
Mayor, I move we adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
It's a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
0. See you Tuesday.